Okay, which I've now done. So welcome everyone to our weekly call. I hope you all had a great weekend wherever in the world you are. Just to quickly shift to my slides for a moment. So in terms of the call today, the sort of primary focus will be on DNS insecurity. Just Peter Lowe, who was just chatting, suggested this will be a good topic for the call because on a serious note, I think he was very impressed with the book that Ross and Josh authored 9 months ago, I think now. I thought there was some interesting learnings in there, so we're trying to tease those out. If we have time after that, I'll just do a brief preview of some of the more interesting sessions at the forthcoming EuroDIG meeting in Vilnius next week for anyone that's going to that, more focused on the policy side. And then, as always, I'll just pull out some of the recent news headlines, forthcoming events, etc. Wrap up on the hour. If time permits, we'll have any other business from anyone as well. So hopefully that's roughly in line with what everyone was expecting. So without further ado, perhaps I might ask Peter first, as if you wanted to give a little context to what, if I say why you thought this was a good idea, that doesn't mean to say I think it's a seriously bad idea, but explain what it was about the book that you thought was particularly noteworthy, and then we can sort of, Ross and Josh can sort of join in and sort of share your reflections, and we'll have a bit of a conversation.
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. So I'm on a bit of a sabbatical at the moment, and I don't read paper books so much these days. But I was recently on a cruise as part of my sabbatical, and I got to finally read my copy of The Hidden Potential of DNS in Security, written by Josh Kuo and Ross Gibson. I hope you pronounced your names right. Which is it was it was great. It's not a huge volume, and it's really well written, which I found it very easy to read and very easy to get through. But at the same time, I thought it was a really I described it as a refreshing refresher for me. Personally, there wasn't like a ton of super new information, but this is sort of particularly my area. But I think for quite a lot of people, there'll be bits in there that they wouldn't have known about before, or particular areas. One thing I mentioned before to someone was that like I've known a lot of people who work in DNS security who know particular areas quite well, like data scientists who can talk about passive DNS or something like that, but they don't know other areas like I don't know, DGA or FastFlux or things like this. So it really does kind of cover all the major areas that I thought when I was in the back of my mind, like, okay, I hope they talk about this, and I hope they talk about this, and pretty much every bit was in there. So yeah, I really liked it. And there were also a few little bits that were new to me as well, in particular with like some bits of history and how things came to be and stuff like that. So I thought it'd be really interesting to have to talk to you guys about it, because another thing is that personally, I don't know much about the process of writing a book like this. So I thought it would be interesting, and that's why I suggested it to Andrew. So nice to see you guys, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for the idea. Hopefully it'll prove interesting.
Can I kick off with a couple of questions? Oh, you've got a presentation. Sure. Okay, right, brilliant.
Well, we can look. I have no problem with dispensing with the presentation if you have questions. Rather address what you'd like to know. But Josh and I did put a few things together just to have.
I'll shut up.
Some kind of guidance. All right. Well, but as we get into relevant stuff, please feel free to jump in with questions. As a quick introduction for those who don't know us, we figured we'd kind of introduce ourselves. So I'll let Josh start off, and then I'll jump in.
Okay. So, well, as everybody knows already, right? We both work for Infoblox, and my official capacity at Infoblox is a trainer, education specialist. So training, teaching people about DNS and about stuff is sort of my daytime job. And as you will learn from Ross shortly, we both encounter a lot of people who are just they don't know enough about DNS in general, or what we talk about in the book. So that's kind of the primary motivator. The book also will help us in our day-to-day job. So my background is varied. I did some software development, did some InfoSec work, sysadmin, and currently just kind of doing the education stuff for Infoblox. Ross?
All right. And as for me, I'm Ross Gibson. I also work for Infoblox. I'm currently a principal solutions architect on our global SME team. So I work with our customers to help do DNS architecture, DNS security questions. I spent a lot of my time actually doing global server load balancing stuff. Before joining Infoblox, I ran a DDI environment for a large financial institution for many years. But then I also have backgrounds in network management systems, routing and switching, and law as an interesting aside, but we can leave that for another time. So we figured we'd kind of start off with, and this goes to what Josh was talking about before, we kind of encounter a few different groups, right? Josh has usually more people that are interested in the running side of it. But I run into those running the DNS, but I also often talk to security teams, right, that have nothing to do necessarily with running the DNS side. And we found that this question can have many different answers depending on who that audience may be. So we kind of figured we'd throw that out and let you guys, in the chat or just speak up and kind of just give us an idea of what DNS security, when you hear that term, what does that make you think of? What is that focused around in your mind?
Yeah. And I think it'll be interesting even for this group to see how different that could be.
So since everyone else is being quiet, I'll offer things like threat feeds, sort of DNS sort of content filtering, block lists, whatever. That would be the first thing I would think about on security, as well as encrypted DNS. I can see Peter's got some better suggestions that he's put in the chat. Protected DNS, DNSSEC, hardening servers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, those definitely fall within. I'd say we kind of came up with three basic categories that we tend to see as answers for this. Right. So yeah, protecting the DNS server, right? That's one big one, right? The network and sysadmins tend to think of DNS security as securing the DNS server itself, right? The platform perspective of it. Say we're securing the platform that is providing DNS services. You've got the other side of it, like you mentioned, Andrew, where you're talking about using your DNS as a platform for security tool sets, right? With threat feeds, category filtering, so kind of the RPZ side of the world. And then you've got that kind of middle ground that usually it's only the really hardcore DNS administrators that kind of dig into it with getting into, the encrypted DNS, maybe the DNSSEC stuff. And I will say there's a very wide spectrum of people that I see that are responsible for running DNS. And some of them are totally the network guys that it was thrown onto their desk. They really don't want to have anything to do with it, but they tolerate it and do just enough to keep it running and then move on. And then there are others like how I was, where my entire job was running the DDI, and so I was obviously much more focused on it and had a much deeper focus on an understanding of the security aspects of what can be employed within the protocol itself. So, but it's definitely a very, very wide spectrum. So I'll hand it over to Josh to kind of explain why we decided a book was the right way to kind of tackle this subject.
Right. So as Peter kind of pointed out, right, Ross and I sort of knew we're not breaking any, new grounds, not significantly with the book, but it's information sort of scattered around the internet in various places. And we want to put it in a easy to digest format. So we wrote it, we kind of aimed to make it as easy to read as possible, especially for non-DNS folks. So we really made it a strong point when we produced the book, although it is published by Infoblox, that we fought very hard to say this needs to be vendor agnostic. Because this is not about any specific feature or product, it's just about the concept and the technology. And we want to reach out to sort of the non-DNS professionals. I think everybody on this call qualifies as DNS experts, DNS professionals. And I think we all have that experience trying to explain what DNS is to other people. Usually the first thing is like, what? That's a whole topic? Is it not just like name, IP, done? Well, how do you make a career out of this? Much less writing a book out of it. So we really want to make it, well, it's more, and we don't want that you have to read, all 14 RFCs and Cricket's DNS and bind before you understand DNS. So we really, so that's kind of what we set up the book to be. And sounds a little lofty or corny in the end. We do want to make, we both believe, right? The more people understand DNS, the more we can have them leverage DNS to make the internet, to make the world a better place.
Yeah, agreed.
So I'm not going to read all the, these are the chapter listings of the book. If you just hit the next animation, Ross. So there are several books out there that do talk about some DNS security topics, like mostly on how to protect the domain name, how to keep the services running. So that's kind of, if you look for these books on Amazon, that tends to be what you find. And we kind of go from a different angle to say, okay, these are all about how to keep DNS service running. And ours is on, well, there's a whole lot of people out there, bad people, who are counting on your DNS server is reliable and it's running, and we're going to use it to do bad things, such as tunneling, exfiltration, lookalikes, whatever. So that's sort of our angle. That's how we think our book is different from the what's already on available on the market.
Yeah, I think actually, if you think about it in kind of the title that Josh and I had in mind when we wrote it, which was DNS insecurity, but no space between in and security. That was really kind of more where we were coming from, is talking about, what are the inherent risks in DNS that people need to be aware of in order to kind of help secure their environments. We did focus a lot on case studies in the book, which was just part of how we decided to structure it. And when talking about the case studies, I think one of the big things that we focused on was trying to make sure that the case studies we chose were as clear as possible for the particular subject that we were trying to address, and not necessarily the hottest, most recent attack. Partially because in the form of a book, trying to keep up with the most recent is just, an errand that was never going to get finished. So we tried to focus on things that broke out the individual pieces. So for example, here, the paypie.com, or, trying to look like PayPal, kind of the first really widespread lookalike. And then we focused on things that highlighted how DNS functioned, right? So for example, using Invisible to try to give a concrete example of how DNS forwarding works. Again, we're not targeting the experts here. We're targeting those that kind of don't play in the DNS pool quite as much as we generally do. And then we tried to highlight unique DNS characteristics that people didn't know offhand, right? So in particular, things like character set, because there's a disparity between the host name character set and then what's actually supported within the domain name itself. And IDN obviously changes the game with that, and how lookalikes can be way more easy to pull off when you throw IDNs in, and then other little twists on that, like what we call it hidden path. And then we wanted to talk about defense in depth, right, as well, because we see DNS as an important layer in the security stack. Not everybody seems to hold that belief in some of the security teams that I talk with, although I will say over the years that has gotten much better. I think some of the surprising things are how little overlap there is even within the DNS space with just IOCs, right? Like Andrew talked about threat feeds, and we have, this study's a little bit older because there's a much broader number than just this, 10 million plus now. But if you look at the overlap between these 4 different vendors, out of over 10 million indicators of compromise, only 71 were present in all 4 of them. So there's really not a great deal of overlap, even in adding multiple different vendors in there. And so we talked about that. We did talk a little bit about zero trust in the context of DNS. We talked about encrypted DNS. Now, I will say the book came out a year ago. We were done writing it probably a year before that, maybe even a little bit more than that. So while Dot and Doe were kind of just getting finalized, DOQ wasn't really done yet, so we don't really have that in there. And then interestingly enough, we did talk about a concept that we call DNAP, which will look very familiar based off of last week's discussion of Zero Trust DNS, but think of it implemented rather than in the client, implemented in the infrastructure itself. So you're actually using a firewall to do it rather than the internal permissions of the client. And Josh, take it away.
Okay, so that's sort of, and that's really it. This is like, I think this is the very last slide, other than the next one, which I think is just, Q&A, is what we would love to get sort of the community to help. The DNS community is, I think historically, we just, the DNS community overall don't do a great job of outreaching to non-DNS folks. We're very good at talking to one another and geeking out over DNS stuff. And when we talk to other groups like security or other folks about DNS, right, we usually hear DNS is a niche topic. And I'm sure all of us have heard that said in one way or another, and we all died a little bit inside when we hear that. So we really would like to change that. We want to make DNS approachable. We don't want to make it too difficult. We want people to start leveraging it, really to make all of us safer online. So that's kind of the call to action that you can probably, kind of like Peter, the folks on this call, you may not learn a whole lot from this, but you probably know someone or some group of people who could benefit greatly, especially if they're in the security role. This will really help them open their eyes, go, wow, I thought DNS was just named to IP, right? That's what most people think it is. And then this will help them understand, I could really leverage this, kind of continuing from Tommy's presentation last week about Zero Trust DNS. Like before they can get there, this is probably a really good primer for them to see this is what you can get when you go to Zero Trust DNS, all the things that leads up to Zero Trust DNS. I guess, yep. And I think that was it.
Yes,
So,
that was it. Yeah. So thank you. Obviously, we've got plenty of time for questions. So go ahead and fire away.
Just a reminder, because I forgot to say this a few weeks ago, if you want to ask a question, use the tool to Zoom tool to raise your virtual hand. If that's under the React icon, click the React icon, then raise your hand. Or equally, if it's easier, pop something in the chat and I'll read it out loud if that's simpler. But in the meantime, Peter has jumped in with his hand raised, as you would obviously expect. So, Peter, did you have a question, or maybe a couple or two?
I've got a couple. So I don't know. It's nice to be able to talk directly to the authors of a book, especially when it's it's good to see good people doing good things. I love the fact that the book is kind of accessible. I think you've achieved what you were setting out to do. And it's definitely the kind of book that I would recommend to like a manager or someone to who was in charge of nominally in charge of the budget for a DNS a DNS service, to give them kind of an idea about all the different aspects of DNS insecurity. I do love the name as well, like the fact that you've got insecurity in there.
Yeah, we had to fight for that one for a while.
Yeah, although
we didn't get it exactly the way we had hoped, but
the thing is, I think the market, I said this is they're why we can't have nice things, the marketing departments. But I think honestly, they might have gotten it right, because calling it the hidden potential of DNS insecurity is probably more attractive to like a manager than one of the, as an in-joke for DNS geeks. I had a couple of questions. So first of all, what made you decide to write it as a pair, co-write it together rather than individually, or how did that all happen?
So we have to thank or to blame, I guess, depending on how you look at it, Cricket. So Josh and I had each kind of expressed to Cricket in passing, that we were interested in writing a book or, doing something, and obviously asking for his advice in that area, since he's got a tremendous amount of experience. And so he was like, hey, you two guys both are interested in writing something. And our marketing group, actually, Josh had worked on a project with them a couple of years ago to do kind of a really, really small primer on it. And they wanted to do something more expansive. And so we kind of all agreed to partner up, and, with the understanding that it was going to be vendor agnostic, right? I mean, I think Infoblox might be mentioned in there mainly because of our employment there, but it doesn't really talk about that in the text itself. We worked very hard to not have it be Infoblox specific and try to make it applicable to, regardless of what platform you're using. These are the things that you are capable of seeing. Here's how you might want to look at them. Here's, areas you might want to improve.
Ross, just to one point of clarification for anyone that doesn't know all the at Infoblox, you might want to just explain that Cricket is a colleague as opposed to a game that's new to the US.
Yes, Ross was referring to Cricket Lou, who, we're all three of us work for Infoblox, and yeah.
Yeah, no, totally valid point, Andrew.
So another question I had was about, I don't know, either like a follow-up or a second edition or anything like that. Like you mentioned a couple of things that have been updated or progressed a lot since you wrote this. The ZTDNS thing from last week, from Tommy and Microsoft, and DOQ, some threat intelligence updates. Are you going to write? Have you got any plans for the next edition, or?
Yeah, so Josh prompted you to ask this question, didn't he?
No,
he sent me this question last week. No, it is something that we've talked about, even through the process of finishing the first one, of how do we keep it up to date, and what would constitute that. We did actually make one change based off of some feedback from somebody in the DNS industry. There was kind of a misstatement of some numbers that we did actually get corrected, and I think is now corrected in the print versions, but probably isn't in the initial one. So hold on to your first edition. Might be worth something someday.
Do you know what?
The inaccuracies. But
when I was reading through it, I was on a boat, and I really wish I'd had a highlighter, because there was a couple of bits that I wanted to go back and just double check, because I might have found a mistake, but I don't know. I'm not sure now. I didn't have a highlighter with me. And do you think that there might be some room for like volume 2 as in something that focused more on the hardening the DNS side, the sort of that side of things that you didn't address in the book?
Yes. Yes. I think
Okay, that was an easy one.
there's stuff in the hardening space that's kind of out there, but there I think is a lack, and it's something Josh and I have talked about putting together and actually have an outline for doing DNS architecture, right? So not so much, where Cricket's book really addresses how to do stuff with DNS and bind. There's not a tremendous amount of why, why would you architect it this way versus that way? And we have, obviously, working as an SA, we have a lot of SAs that come in that may not have experience and need to be taught that. So that's made it very clear to us that there really isn't a great resource out there on how to do a DNS architecture. So that's something we would like to address. That could be a really big topic, though. We did put an outline together. We had a publisher be like, how long do you think this is going to be?
And how many volumes?
We could break this up. We could do one for recursive and one for authoritative and one for internal. So there hopefully will be some follow on. It will probably be something that Josh and I do on our own, most likely. But I don't know what Infoblox's interest is in doing a volume or a second edition. I think they probably would at some point, but I don't know that we're quite there yet. But yeah, we knew that the encrypted DNS piece was going to evolve, right? I mean, we even said that in the book, like, hey, we know this is an emerging area. It's going to develop over time.
I've got a couple of other things, but I will let Eric, I'll shut up now and let Eric answer the question.
Hey there. Congratulations on making something for people to understand, right? It's always been difficult to train new people, like investigating passive DNS and such, to say, well, where are the threats? Right. So until you know what bad DNS looks like, you never really understand. One of the things, my question is a follow-up more on Peter, which is, yeah, you probably will find that there is more stuff for a second edition, but you might also think of maybe just having an appendix that points to maybe a blog series or a way to just say, here are some anecdotes, and from maybe some people you haven't talked to yet, that might actually have some nice juicy little anecdotes of just badness in the internet and how DNS was involved.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent suggestion. We do have DNSinsecurity.com. Josh has put a couple things up there, so we certainly could easily do something like that. Yeah, that would definitely make it a lot easier to keep up to speed, because as Peter had talked about, the process of writing a book, it is not fast.
Good question. Thanks, Eric. I know Peter will have some follow-ups, but let's just see. Does anyone else have any questions or comments that you wanted to come in with? As I said, either just raise your virtual hand or pop something in the chat if that's easier. Okay, so Peter has mind read Jim. So,
so just a couple of other things. First of all, I do want to say, though, one thing I was a little bit afraid of, that it might just be a giant ad for Infoblox services. So I do think you did a pretty good job of being vendor agnostic. So yeah, congratulations on that. I think authors get a bit of a pass, for promoting stuff that they're involved in. But yeah, I didn't. There's references to reference material and stuff from Infoblox, but definitely didn't get that feeling from it. So yeah, nice. I was curious whether there are any parts that you felt might have been not controversial exactly, but maybe like other people had sort of conflicting opinions for any areas. And I also am curious, like, how long it took and what the process of writing the book is. It's a very fluffy question, but I'm genuinely curious about it.
So I could talk about the very beginning of it. So when I joined Infoblox for the education department, I started an initiative on the whole vendor agnostic thing that, hey, we shouldn't just have courses that teach people about how to use our product. So I wrote a whole set of vendor agnostic, like basic DNS, DHCP protocol classes that's essentially free for the public. So with the idea that, some of our customers who bought the products, they have a junior admin who needs to get on and start using it to set up DNS or DHCP. Well, they need to understand what DNS is, and we can't just throw them DNS and bind, go, well, finish all 620 pages and then use the, that's too much. So I wrote some primer classes, and I wrote one. When I was done with those, my boss said, hey, that looks pretty good. Why don't you do one for DNS security? So that was the sort of the that's what grew into the book, because I started writing that, and there's a lot more I wish I could put into the class, but it just didn't fit the format. So I kept all that notes, and that's when I reached out to Cricket and said, hey, I want to turn this into a book. And then he's like, oh, Ross is doing the same thing, so you guys should talk. So yeah, and that's like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And echoing the question in the chat, are those lessons or classes available online, Josh?
Yes, let me find the proper link.
So yeah, Josh probably has a better link than the one I put in there. But
oh, sorry, I didn't see that, Ross. Apologies.
I just put it in there. So I was trying to find the right one, but Josh knows.
No, Ross, you have the right one. That's the right one.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as far as controversial stuff in it, I don't know there was anything in particular that was controversial. As far as new stuff out there, I think DDIP wasn't new, right? SIDN Labs had talked about the concept to some extent. We took that a little bit further and gave it a slightly different name, mainly because there would be potential confusion with the name they were using and what was emerging as discovery mechanisms, DNR, DDR, and the like. Hidden Path was a little bit kind of newish stuff, not something we've seen people actually doing, but something that does work. I have tested it through multiple resolvers and it does work. And that's really, it's not really so much a DNS trick as is just trying to play on people's lack of understanding of how, the difference between a domain name and a URL or URI, which is, I mean, at the end of the day, that's all phishing is anyway. It's just trying to prey on people's lack of understanding in a lot of ways. As far as the process, let's see, I mean, from that idea, we did an outline, and then, the two of us basically wrote it, and then the real process started, right? The process of editing, and going through that, which was, it was an interesting process. In particular, the editor that we used intentionally was not particularly technical, which was good because he could spot things that needed further explanation that a technician wouldn't necessarily have, right? So you'd say, well, what does this mean? And like, why is this important? Or, is the person that's reading this going to understand what this acronym is? Or do we need to spell it out? And it's like, okay, yeah, if you're reading this book, you better know what TCP is, right? But there were other ones where it was like, no, yeah, we probably should spell this out and explain it a little bit. So that was helpful in providing that kind of third-party perspective, but it did take time to go through that. It's just getting really nitpicky about language and all kinds of interesting things, which is fine for me, coming from the law side of the house. I'm used to doing stuff like that, but for some people that could get really tedious.
I was wondering in particular about like fact checking and stuff like that, because if someone's writing a novel, then you don't really need some beta readers to be able to verify whether what you said is true or not. But stuff like, I don't know, putting a slash in a domain name, it is something that other people would go, what is that? Is that true? And but other people would already know that. But all throughout the book, there's all these technical statements, and you have a lot of references. But did you have to go back and just triple check them all yourself, or did you have some other people who kind of were able to check for you as well?
We did most of those. As far as checking links and stuff, they did do some of that as well, like to validate that something, you know, was actually accessible for people. And there were a couple situations where we had to go back and find different links for certain stuff. But most of the RFC stuff was not too difficult to find. You know, it was either stuff we already knew and we just kind of had to go like, oh yeah, which RFC was that? But I wouldn't say there was somebody else that went through and like read the RFCs to like find all these references. That was stuff that we did in the process of putting it all together. You know, the whole commentary about the, you know, putting the slash in the domain name thing is like, again, that was a conversation that we were having with Cricket, and I can't even remember what we were talking about exactly, but and he was like, well, yeah, of course you could do that. And I was like, really? You could put a slash in? And then that sent me down that whole thing of hidden path that I was like, okay, I got to see if it will do this. And, you know, will the product actually take, you know, will our product take it? Will Bind do it? You know, and actually setting up those domains on those, and then going through all the kind of big name resolvers to see if they would actually resolve it, and then finding out, well, it depends on what version of DIG you're using. And, you know, there are all kinds of different things, but it does actually, unfortunately, in some ways work. You know, and throwing that out to some other people and having them look at it and say, yeah, well, yeah, that's true. You've got a point, but are we really going to go fix it?
Right.
I think we should, but I am so far removed from being able to actually make that happen. You know, might as well be a dream. So at least I can make people aware of it. So when they're looking in the logs and see that, they don't say, oh, well, that's just a URL. They say, no, that's actually a domain name. That is a valid domain name. So now I need to look more deeply. So that was kind of the hope in spelling that out, was just so that people who are looking at, who are doing the research, like Eric had talked about, saying, oh, actually, this is something I need to look at.
The controversial question, I think, partly came from the DNSSEC side of things, which has been, I mean, discussed a bit, in particular lately. You know, coming back to the original thing that you said about writing this, and about how you know, we find it easy to talk to other technical people, but difficult to talk, you know, it's an inaccessible topic. I don't know, personally, I think DNSSEC has a marketing problem, because it's basically the only real way we have at the moment of, you know, mitigating or protecting against cache poisoning. But it's very hard to set up, and it's very difficult to convince someone who's in control of money to spend money on it, because you don't get any immediate benefit, and usually it just causes problems. So yeah, I can see both sides of it.
I think the biggest problem that we were trying to address with the DNSSEC side of it was just making sure that people understood what it actually was, because it's unbelievable how many people still think that DNSSEC is encrypted DNS, right? I mean, before encrypted DNS became a thing, so many people from the security side are like, oh, well, yeah. And they think that it somehow has anything to do with encryption. It's like, no, this is not encrypting anything. It provides no privacy protection whatsoever. And then there's, and I love to refer to it, and this is specifically why I put in the book, page 90, where I talk about why you should not sign internal zones. I cannot tell you how many times that comes up. So there were definitely some pet peeves that made it in the book, honestly, just so that when I get the question from either customers or other SAs, I can say, here's a reference you can go point them to and say, do not do this, and here's why.
Understood. All right. Okay. I'm done for now. Thank you so much for answering all my annoying questions.
Thanks for having questions. It's great. It's enjoyable to talk about it and see where, you know, where people could see things expanding, right? What
So-
else could we add?
Sorry, how long did it take you to write the book from start to finish, kind of roughly?
To write it, it was probably 9 months, wouldn't you say, Josh?
Yeah, about yeah.
Something like that.
Okay.
Of the actual
And then
writing,
and then
not
it's
including
and
the
then
editing.
then it's another. I think it's roughly another almost a year. Just the publishing mechanism.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
hmm
Okay. Well, yeah. Thanks again.
So-
Cheers.
And you'll see I popped in the chat a topical link from our good friend Jeff Houston, calling time on DNSSEC. Just
Yes, we both read that last week. It's a great
Yes,
it's a great blog, and we were actually talking about that last week as well.
But I have to say, I love the idea of if a topic comes up, referring people out to your book. That's a cunning way for generating sales. I think that's a genius tactic to do that. I'm sure people will be making sort of careful notes. Okay, well, look, conscious of the time, let's draw a line on it there, but that's really interesting. So thank you, Ross and Josh, particularly Josh, breaking away from the bar to come join us. That's really helpful. And thank you, Peter, for the suggestion and the questions. I hope people found that useful. And I guess a few people might be taking notes to go order the book if they don't have it already. And I saw a nice comment in the chat from Mary, who's obviously a loyal or impressed user of some of the courses that you referenced, Josh. So
Yeah, Josh did a fantastic job with them. I had the benefit of betaing some of them early on. They are very well done.
Brilliant. Okay, let's then just sort of. We've got roughly 15 minutes left, so I'll just quickly divert away from that, if I may. So bear with me whilst I find. I don't see my screen's gone to sleep. Let me do that again. I will reshare. Right, so reshare my screen. I'm just going to briefly divert onto EuroDIG and then just call out a few other things for your information to go look at. So EuroDIG first. So this is the sort of European version of the IGF Internet Governance Forum. So the IGF, some of you may know, meets once a year. This year it's meeting in December in Riyadh. But there's sort of regional, sort of effectively continental sort of satellites of it which meet prior and feed into the global summit. EuroDIG is meeting next week in Vilnius in Latvia. I'm not going to go through these at length, but I've just put on 3 slides. It's a 3-day event, so the agenda, and just to call out some sessions, and it's linked with the Baltic domain name forum. That might not be its proper title, but so the 4th stream, the one in building 4, that's the linked event effectively, if you're looking at the screen. So it kicks off on Monday, which is sort of day 0 largely. So the through till 4 o'clock is prior to the kickoff of the event proper. You'll see a number of sessions there I've highlighted. Obviously sort of mainly with a sort of linkage to DNS or some policy stuff. So for pre-6 on strengthening DNS security, and pre-7 looking at the NIS2 directive and DNS, which I think the DNS Research Forum are helping, if not delivering the entirety, I'm not sure, pre-7. There's also on the governance side, pre-4 on the far left, looking at some of the governance fora that have taken place recently around the GDC, WSIS +20, NetMundial +10, and so on. And a latter part of the sort of day zero on the right hand column on the towards the bottom of the page there, you see the launch event for the Council of Europe and IEEE joint report on the metaverse and its impact on human rights, the rule of law and democracy. And then you've got the opening keynotes for the event proper. All the timings are Eastern European Standard Time, I think that is, so UTC +3, so do bear that in mind in terms of time zone. You can join remotely, by the way. I should have mentioned that. I've got it on the slide somewhere. So if you're not registered to attend but are interested, you can join remotely at no charge. The cutoff for registering to attend in person was midnight yesterday, so too late to register to actually go to Vilnius next week, but plenty of opportunity to join any or all of the sessions remotely. I'm not going to go through all of the rest of these. I just want to put them on the screen so you can see them. I've highlighted ones which were of interest to me, but as you can see, there's plenty of other stuff. It's maybe not as complex an agenda as, for example, the IETF meetings, but there's sort of good variety of topics. I'm especially interested in workshops 1A and 1B on child safety online and protecting vulnerable groups online. That's wearing my hat as a trustee of the Internet Watch Foundation, but other topics are available, as you can see, running through to mid-afternoon on the Wednesday. And you'll see on the screen now there's a link to the online registration, which I'll share afterwards as well. So worth a look if you have any time next week. There's a good variety of stuff there, I believe. I should also say, sorry, I almost forgot, apologies flipping around the slides, workshop 1B towards the bottom left of the screen, protecting vulnerable groups online from harmful content, looking at new technical approaches. But I sort of dipped into the team organising this session last week, and it turns out they're still short someone from the technical community to provide their perspective at the start, about 3 minutes worth of perspective to help kick off the discussion. They got people lined up from various other stakeholder groups, but not formally someone with a deep technical knowledge. So if anyone would be interested in fulfilling that role, please perhaps message me separately and let me know, because it'd be really handy to have someone next Tuesday, as you can see, 12:15 to 1:15 local time there, to just provide a few thoughts at the start and then just participate in the discussion for that session. So, as I say, reach out to me, chat offline if that could be you. Right, let me move on. There's just a few things news-wise I wanted to highlight. As always, I'll just go through these quickly. These are all also in the weekly news headlines email. For those of you that signed up to that, if you're not, want to get that, ping me an email and I'll add you to the mailing list. First one from IPOC. This is a subsidiary of Road and Schwartz, who we've sort of had on this call previously, talking about their packet classification and deep packet inspection capabilities, which they claim in the data sheet. I've obviously not seen this demonstrated, that it's perfectly okay dealing with TLS 1.3, DOE, encrypted client hello, or encrypted SNI, etc., and can identify all. I think it's as many as 1,000 different types of traffic in the data stream. So I thought it worth a mention, as I think it's a really interesting development. I have reached out a few times to IPOC, but they've been not enthusiastic about joining the call, even though we had a couple of people from the Road and Schwartz research team on this call, I think 18 months, 2 years ago. But anyway, I think that should be, that's worth a look for some of you, certainly on the network side. Also looking at blockchain domain naming systems. You see unblockable domains and blockchain.com have started the process to register .blockchain with ICANN as a new global TLD. So nothing to add to that other than an interesting development. I can see Josh might write something controversial about blockchain domain. So
right, Peter had asked about what controversial topic. Like, well, this probably would qualify as one.
yes, I think that's a good call. And yeah, there's certainly an area of sort of pretty active at the moment. So yes, a very good point, Josh. Right, just quickly also, Jeff Houston, I mentioned a few minutes ago, has written up a very helpful summary of DNS related discussions at RIPE 88 a couple of weeks or so ago. So if you didn't go to RIPE but wanted to catch up, that's definitely worth a look. Infoblocks, coincidentally, given just talking to Josh and Ross, there's a piece published looking at Microsoft's Zero Trust DNS service, given their take on it, very topically, given Tommy's excellent presentation last week. So you get an alternate take on that. And then a fun thing, well, it's fun to me. I saw there was a chat about how widespread support for encrypted client hello is. Someone took a look at the top 10,000 roughly websites, and thus far pretty much none of them support ECH. Now, to be fair, that's not too surprising because I don't think any of the mainstream CDNs currently support ECH. You may recall Cloudflare did very temporarily for just a few days, then switched it all off again. It was this is last November. It was due to be re-enabled, but never did quite get to be re-enabled, at least not yet. Although I believe it's still coming, but for whatever reason it's not there. So I thought it was interesting that there's virtually no support on the server side at the moment, albeit you may know certainly the Chrome browser, I think Firefox and probably others do support it on the client side. And then a couple of other things. The DNS Research Federation have launched Trust Checker, which is designed to sort of check the validity of a link that you've been sent, which I think is a really good idea to help protect us all from phishing, etc. And there's a fun interview with Emily and Lucian Taylor from DNS Research Federation being interviewed about that tool and what brought it about. The tool itself is available. I probably should have put a link to that as well on there. I'll do that afterwards. And then again, Infoblocks, there was a really interesting write-up about there's something that they'd identified, this is on their analysis side, that they've named SecShow, which seems to be a Chinese actor from the China Education Research Network, who's conducting global scale DNS probes to look at the response from various open resolvers, which could be a cause for concern, as you can see. So definitely worth a read on that if you have time. And then finally, just I mentioned the one at the bottom of the screen there, as you can see, this is a post from Eka, Eric Rescorla, formerly the CTO of Firefox, just expanding on why the TLS working group isn't planning to support post-quantum cryptography in TLS 1.2, but is doing so in TLS 1.3. Which Eka just gives his take on. And then other stuff less directly relevant to the topic at hand, but I thought was interesting. There's a good blog post from Milton Muller on the internetgovernance.org, I don't necessarily always agree with Milton, but he writes some interesting stuff this time on the about multi-stakeholders. So you may find that interesting if you have an interest in policy stuff. Again, I won't go through all of these, but there's a bit of a controversy. Japan potentially banning or become very concerned about Line and getting pushback from South Korea. I didn't know it was a South Korean piece of software. I have used Line, but I didn't know its provenance. But this article is comparing it with the controversy with TikTok's use in the US in particular. So, but just involving two different countries. And then there's a really interesting article looking at the best browsers for privacy, and it gives some rationale as to why you should use those on ZDNet. And then I think finally some testing of 100 free Android-based VPNs to see how good they are. If you use a free VPN on Android, you really want to read this because almost all of them, you won't be too surprised to know, have got significant security flaws, and somebody has tested them all and written up what those flaws are. So definitely worth a look at that. And then finally from the headlines, again, it's purely caught my eye from self-interest, an expose about the security flaws in hotel check-in kiosks. So use that, read that, and you probably won't use a hotel check-in kiosk again either. Or sleep well in your hotel room if you have done so. So that's all stuff that caught my eye in the news over the last week. Some deadlines coming up. I won't go through all these because we haven't got time. But there's usual deadlines. So one I will call out at the very end there is there's $5 million of funding. There's an open call for proposals from Safe Online to tap into that funding. And I think that, in the interest of time, was it for me, other than just a reminder, we won't have a call next week because I'm in Vilnius for EuroDIG, but we'll catch up the week after and perhaps share some highlights from that, plus other stuff that's topical and in the news. So I think it was SEC show answering the question Peter's posed in the chat. Apologies if my diction wasn't quite clear enough and made you think it was something other than that. So sorry about that. Right, so we are slightly over time. So Josh and Ross, thank you again for a really interesting talk. Good to learn a bit more about the process of publishing, as well as about the content of the book and how it came together. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Peter, for the suggestion. Everyone else, I hope that was useful and you got some things to read if you've not already caught up on them. And as I said, if you don't get the weekly headlines and want them, drop me a message directly and I'll add you to the list. And finally, if you might be that person to represent the tech community at that one EuroDIG session next Tuesday, again, please let me know. It'd be good to have that gap filled if possible. But other than that, have a fantastic week. Don't call in next week because I'll be in Vilnius, but speak to everyone in 2 weeks' time. So catch up then. Thanks all and see you then. Bye.
Thanks, Andrew. Safe travels.
You too. Bye.